Hello guys, so I welcome you to this live, and today we're going to talk about trauma. I have invited a British psychotherapist, the trauma specialist, to talk about this subject. So one more time, we're going to wait for our speaker to join us. So I'm going to invite her right now. The trauma. So strange, I can't find her here and she can't see my live. This is so strange. The trauma. This is so weird, guys. Invite to join. Okay, maybe like this. This is so strange, guys. Do you know what can be the matter? I can't invite her here and she cannot join it. This is so strange. Okay, just a minute, guys. I'm very sorry. We have a small delay here. Just a minute. I can see all of you. Hello, guys. Thank you for coming. Okay. All right, I think now it's working. Okay. Just a second. Please, guys, let's not discuss any not subject related matters, okay? Today we're talking about trauma. Today we're going to talk about trauma. Just a moment. How are you feeling, guys, today? Hope everything is okay. Okay. Hello, Rachel. Please join me. I have sent you a request, so you should see it. Okay, I can send another request now. Okay. Rachel. Send a request. Okay. All right, guys. So one more time, I'm telling you. So if you have any questions, just send them there. Hi. Hello,
how are you?
I can see you. Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining
Yeah,
with
sorry,
me.
a call just bumped me off. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I was trying to invite you and I couldn't see your name in the list, and I was like, "Oh my God, what's going on?"
We got there. How are you doing?
Yes, everything is working. Can you hear me? Everything is fine with the sound?
Yeah, everything's fine this end, as long as nobody calls and bumps us off again.
Okay, I hope so. Okay. All right. So thank you so much for doing this with me. So can you just tell me and people who are watching us just a few words about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I work and specialize in complex trauma and complex PTSD. I do this because I grew up in a very complex environment, and in my teen years and 20s and early 30s, realized there was absolutely nothing available for treating complex trauma, and there were no services to meet the need of people that required those services. So essentially, I have pursued my understanding in complex trauma and how it affects us and how it affects our relationship with ourselves, the world, our internal systems. And now I deliver a specialized approach to reduce the impact of all of the symptom clusters and to process trauma effectively. So essentially, there's no need for people to be walking around with all of this. It can be resolved, and that's kind of my focus in life now. So yeah.
This is beautiful, because the thing is, I've never heard about CPTSD. I've heard about this post-traumatic syndrome. I've heard about that, but never heard about the complex one. So I think that's going to be very interesting. So let's start with talking about trauma in general. What does it mean to have a trauma?
Okay, so there's a couple of different things there. So you can have a traumatic event. So for example, you can be hit by a car. You could experience a sexual assault. You could be robbed. You could be in a disaster. You could witness something. And that one incident is called single incident trauma type 1. So with that, trauma is what happens after the event. So for example, after the traumatic event, psychological, emotional, behavioural changes can occur, and that's due to the fact that the event was so overwhelming that neurologically it created structural changes to accommodate the impact of that event. So after that event occurs, changes are created in our behaviour, in our emotions, in the way we think about ourselves, in the way we think about the world. And that's what some of the symptoms are. So, for example, PTSD is a single incident trauma, and you have different symptom clusters around that. So avoidance is one of them. And we avoid thinking about the event. We avoid feeling any emotions that are related to the event. We avoid maybe walking down a street that might make us think about that event. So avoidance is something that occurs because we believe we can't take dealing with the experience of that event. So our brain tries to keep us safe by making us avoid anything to do with that event.
That happened to
However,
me too. I had a car accident. I was driving a bike. I was living in Beijing back then, and I was going from my university back home. It was 11 kilometers drive. And so I was hit by a taxi. And I was okay. Of course, I was bruised, and it was quite bad. I was scared, but I can't. It's how many years passed. I still can't make this decision to buy a bike and try driving again. I just can't do this. I'm still afraid. Classic case.
Yeah. So essentially, we end up then accommodating that avoidance. So we then make changes in our life to deal with the fact that we don't want to walk down that street, we don't want to buy a bicycle, we don't want to hear a bicycle bell, we don't want to do all these things that might make us think about what happened. And so that's an external example, you not wanting to buy a bike. But an internal example is we start to avoid emotions, because any strong emotion, our brain thinks, oh, well, this is a strong emotion, it's linked to that trauma, so let's avoid having emotions. So then people can start to numb out. So a lot of people with PTSD can end up numbing out quite a lot. So they don't feel anything, and that's to do with the avoidance, because they feel it's too overwhelming.
So because it's too overwhelming, our brain prevents us from feeling strong emotions, like strong fear or strong anxiety, or even can it be like positive emotion too, like love, like happiness?
Any emotion. If it's a big, strong emotion, we can just avoid all of it. And actually there's a term called happy phobia. So people with a PTSD, it can develop and go on. So you don't even want to feel good emotions, because even that's overwhelming. And also sometimes, especially with complex trauma and complex PTSD, people develop happy phobia because everything's been taken from them. So why have a nice feeling for a connection when that might be taken away? Why have a nice feeling about anything when essentially that person may harm you because you have an inability to trust anyone?
So that can have a serious effect on our life, because we are going to avoid living to the fullest. This is terrible. Yeah,
we completely avoid everything that has any kind of stimulation in an emotional aspect with avoidance, yes.
Oh, so what are there others, like things that can signal that we have?
So with a single incident trauma, so we were just talking about avoidance, so there's another one, and it's intrusive symptom clusters. So intrusive symptom clusters are things where, like flashbacks. Now a flashback, people often just think that it's imagery and visual. Actually, a flashback can be auditory, it can be emotional, it can be physical, it can be a visual flashback. So you can also have negative cognitions as well. So negative cognitions are when you have altered perceptions and thoughts about the world and yourself. So they're a different type of symptom cluster. But I just want to go back to the re-experiencing symptom clusters as well, because a lot of people have trauma, but they don't know they have trauma, and they just feel like there's something really wrong with them. So essentially, when you have these intrusive symptoms, you'll be having a lot of nightmares, you'll be having a lot of, like, your body can be re-experiencing the trauma, and it can be re-experiencing it through a way of your heart can be constantly palpitating. You can constantly feel like you might have sweaty palms, you can't breathe properly, or you have very shallow breathing. You can get a lot of tummy pain. You know, you can get a lot of, I mean, people with a history of sexual abuse that may not even remember their sexual abuse can have a lot of gynecological problems. However, there's nothing wrong with them, but they have these problems. So there's a lot of re-experiencing symptom clusters that people are getting and don't realize it's actually because they've got trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So
really, you said it can be linked even to the sound. So we hear something, then we get triggered.
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, if you were in a car accident and the sound of the car flipping over and hitting the road over and over again, when you hear a loud noise, that can re-trigger that sound inside your brain, and that can set off the whole stress response, and you can become highly activated by that.
So if we feel stressed all the time like that because we have flashbacks, right, all this pumping heart and stuff like this, what kind of, is there like other health effects that can be like on our body?
There can be long-term health effects. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have IBS because their body's storing all the trauma. And when people can get pulmonary heart diseases from having their heart activated all the time in the stress response. So there's a lot of now different kind of autoimmune diseases are being linked to complex trauma. So there's a lot of physical impact.
So we have to deal with that, otherwise our body is going to pay for it in some other ways. Like,
if you imagine that if you've grown up in a complex trauma environment, every day you're in PTSD mode. Every day you're in complex trauma mode, and you're having to carry the symptoms and try and navigate the world. So as a child, if you're growing up in a domestic abusive environment, or you're being sexually abused, physical abuse, neglect, you're having to deal with all of the accommodation of the trauma, and you're also having to deal with trying to contain that to survive in the world and get to school and try to pay attention in a lesson when your heart is going because you've got all this trauma inside you, and you know when you go home there's going to be more trauma. So accommodating that for all of those years, people end up with long-term health issues. Yeah.
Oh my God! All right. So we talked about the avoiding, right? Then we have the nightmares, right? This system clusters. What is it called? Flashbacks, right?
Yeah. So on the intrusive symptom clusters, you have flashbacks, you have nightmares, you have physical sensations, you have emotional flashbacks. So that's when a lot of people become emotionally dysregulated, because they're experiencing all of these symptoms on the inside that the rest of the world can't see. So when they're responding to an external environment, they're responding from a place of activated trauma. So they're unable to regulate their emotions because they're under such stress, and effects in the brain are, ongoing. So, for example, neurological changes occur in the limbic system, which is the emotional brain. So when somebody's constantly activated and in trauma inside themselves, their emotional brain starts to shape differently. And the emotional brain overrides what we call the prefrontal cortex. And we're meant to use the prefrontal cortex to override the emotional brain. But the emotional brain becomes stronger. And that means we can't think rationally, we can't respond rationally, and that's because we don't have access to the rational part of our brain. So we're constantly responding from a fight, flight, freeze, flop response.
So we're kind of, our emotions get control over us.
Oh, yeah.
This is so dangerous.
Yeah, it is dangerous, yeah. And the way it affects people the most is it affects their relationships, because they're unable to regulate themselves in their interpersonal relationships
They can
and
just
their
get
family.
triggered all the time without like any even serious particular reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it can just, well, on your internal systems, so people can't see your flashbacks and they
Hmm.
can't feel your flashbacks, but you can. So it's really hard for people in the environment to understand what's going on with you, because they can't see that actually you have World War III going off inside of your body 24/7, and they can't see that. So they don't understand why you're responding the way you're responding.
So that's why it's that important to deal with the trauma, because unless you deal with it, you won't be able to build healthy relationship, like be happy in
Yeah.
marriage, have friends, and
Yeah.
enjoy your life.
Yeah, well, you go on to get re-traumatized, because you know you're in trauma, and then you can get re-traumatized by your marriage breaking down. You can be re-traumatized because some people are unable to care for their children, so they lose their children. They're unable to maintain friendships. They're unable to stay in a job. I mean, it affects people in every level on an internal and external world.
So we can imagine how this trauma can simply shape your life. So it just wreaks the havoc in your life in every area, bringing more trauma. So, and it can explain, like, if you are jobless, if you don't have a partner, why you don't have friends, right? So it affects us in so many different ways that we can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my, this is very interesting. So this is the PTSD. So how about the CPTSD?
Okay, so CPTSD, I mean, PTSD, we've just touched very lightly on it, so there's a lot more to it than just that. However, complex PTSD, so that means that it's a trauma that's an ongoing nature of trauma.
Ongoing
And
nature.
you know that it's going to happen again. You're absolutely powerless to stop it. You have no control over when it's going to happen, and it's usually, not always, but usually of an interpersonal nature. So what that means is it's normally somebody you know. So for example, if a child is at home and there is domestic abuse going on, sexual abuse going on, they know the perpetrators because they're normally in their family systems, so they can never escape them. So they know that that night or that afternoon or that morning, they're going to go through that abuse again, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. So that gives them PTSD on PTSD on PTSD on PTSD every single day, and it's ongoing. So that means they may endure that for their entire childhood, and then they may endure it throughout their teenage years, through their adult years. They may end up in other relationships where similar abuse occurs. So complex PTSD has ongoing, enduring changes which can lead to, if untreated, different types of personality disorders and other comorbid issues. So complex trauma and PTSD is essentially a lot more complex, hence the name, than PTSD.
So,
And it takes
so the CPTSD is related to, like, how to the domestic violence, to abuse,
absolutely,
emotional abuse, physical abuse.
yeah, sexual abuse, neglect, drug and alcohol abuse, bullying at school, bullying in the workplace.
What about
So,
codependency? Like,
well, that's part of it. That's not the actual. You know, codependent people are part of a traumatic system.
mhm.
So, normally people that are very codependent have grown up in an environment where there is other abuse occurring, and they've learned to be codependent in response to that. So.
So what are the symptoms of the CPTSD?
So they're all of the symptoms of PTSD and more. So you have something called affect dysregulation. So it's where basically they have difficulty modulating any type of anger or emotion. So their outbursts are more frequent, and they have impulsive and risk-taking behaviour. So the impulsive and risk-taking behaviour can be demonstrated in the way they drive a car, in the way they eat, in the way they drink, in the way they take drugs. It can even be how they do extreme sports. They might just lean towards dangerous sports without any safety precautions in place. So the reckless and injurious behaviour, you see a lot of self-harming, and that can be in any, a lot of self-harming in all sorts of different ways, shapes and forms. You have alterations in attention and consciousness. So alterations in attention and consciousness is a lot more of the dissociative subtypes which can occur. So depersonalization, derealization, feeling that you're not in your body, completely disconnected, memory issues, and there's all, you know, the neurobiology of complex trauma is, you know, very, very, very interesting. Because essentially the brain has been trying to accommodate all of these symptoms for all of these years, every day. So it's reshaped itself.
So the brain is reshaping itself?
Yeah, in response to the accommodation of the trauma.
How does it work?
So well, that's another day in itself.
Yeah, no, just what's happening there, like.
Okay, so for example, when somebody feels incredibly unsafe, the brainstem, which is at the back here, the brainstem is in control of like instinct and reflex, and so and blood flow. So it starts to suck the blood out of certain areas of the brain to put it into the body, so the body can respond better to the trauma. And one of the places it takes it from is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And so that's where often people are unable to talk about their trauma, because they can't talk about it because they didn't have access to the area in the brain where our language is. So they can't associate language to their experience because they didn't have access to that part of the brain at that time. I mean, and that's just a tiny little part of what happens. So it also, the access to the hippocampus can shrink. And so the hippocampus is where our long-term memory storage is. And it's also where our conscious memory is, conscious awareness. So, for example, if you can't access the fact that you know you're in a particular room, because you can't access that part of your brain, you feel more dissociated. So there's a lot going on a neurobiology level in relation to PTSD and complex trauma. So it's quite, I mean, you know, talking about the brain and trauma is like a whole nother subject in itself. But these sorts of changes have occurred, so they affect you on a daily basis. Like a child trying to learn in school, their working memory is so full of trauma because the trauma has not been able to file itself properly. They can't focus or remember what's going on in the moment. And that's why a lot of children with attention difficulties are kind of misdiagnosed and mislabeled when actually they've got trauma going on and the brain's trying to cope with it. It's quite interesting, isn't it?
I'm taking notes.
Yeah. So another one with complex trauma is the alteration in self-perception. So people with complex trauma often have chronic guilt and shame, self-disgust, and that a lot of that is their experience of themselves in relation to the trauma and what's happened to them. So people with shame and disgust, horror and guilt and rage, those are all core emotions of complex trauma. And they are physical sensations. They're not like just a feeling. They're actually a physical experience, you know, of rage and shame, guilt and disgust. And they are body sensations as well. And they're very, very overwhelming. And they are the core responses in complex trauma. So, you know.
Oh my God, how is it possible to really ever get out of this? It sounds so complex.
Absolutely. It is very, very complex. However, there is a complex system in place to work with this. And I mean, that's part of all of my training, and now what I've created in my own model is you can work with all of this and it can be resolved. It doesn't have to be a lifelong jail sentence. You know, what people did to you had an impact, but it doesn't define you. So essentially there is help out there, and it can be delivered in a way that resolves trauma. So the the first point of healing is that person making a choice that they're going to get up and they're going to find that help and they're going to commit to it and they're going to get better. So essentially, it's really important that people realize they have that power to make that choice.
But how do we understand that we are traumatized?
You start looking, so how do you understand that you're traumatized? Is you look at your past and you look at your experiences. Who tucked you in at bed at night? Did you feel safe? Were you loved? Were you provided for? Did you live a life free from abuse? Did you live a life free from poverty? Did you live a life free from physical violence? Did you live a life free from sexual abuse? You know, if you had any of those experiences in your life, essentially what's happened is you've had traumatic experiences. You know, were your parents loving, or did they make you earn love? Did you have to earn love, or were you
given it? Did you need to be a good girl or a good boy to be liked by your parents?
Yeah. You know.
So we just need to sit and analyze what our childhood was like, right?
And be honest, because often we love our parents, but it's the parents that have abused us.
And do they do that consciously, or it's more like
well, that
they
depends
are
on
victims of victims?
You can be a victim of a victim. I was a victim of a victim, but I'm not a perpetrator. You've got a choice. You have a choice. And even if you have become somebody that, you know, has become violent because of your history, that can still change. You can always change. You can always make a choice to do something different. You know,
so we can turn from an abused person, we can turn into abusers, can't we?
Some people do, yeah.
But that's very interesting. So the first thing we can do, because I feel like when you are traumatized and when you are stuck in this, it's very difficult to make that decision that you need to go and change something. Because I know for a fact, because I lived in an abusive environment for 6 years, and I was sure that I am happy.
Yeah.
I was sure that my life is beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's the trick of the narcissist, is you absolutely love it, you know, because you're so desperate in trying to please them. You know, you're so desperate in trying to earn it. Yeah.
I feel like it's all in my power. If I try a little bit harder, if I do a little bit of more effort, then my family is going to be back to normal and we're going to be very happy. It all depends on me. It's all my responsibility.
You've just got to work that bit harder. You just got to please them that little bit more. You've just got to keep going, and you've just got to change yourself a little bit more to fit what they want from you. But essentially, you're never going to please them, and you're never going to get that. I had an experience in my teenage years when I was asked by my mother, what do I want from her? You know, why do I keep hassling her? And I just said, I just want you to love me. And her response was, oh, well, no, you don't get that for free. You have to earn it.
She said it just like that.
Love isn't something you pin on a wall. You have to earn that.
So
no, exactly. And it's the same with your situation. You don't have to earn it. Love is something in abundance. It's just given for free. It's just there.
Just deserve to be loved, just like that.
It's not even a deserving. It's your human right. It's your absolute right as a human being to receive, experience, and give love. You know, so people that are growing up or in a marriage where they're feeling like they have to earn something, they have to be better, they have to be different, that on an ongoing basis will cause complex trauma. Because you're not actually... Go on.
No, because I feel like, so we receive these kind of messages, right, and they shape our personality. So if throughout your childhood you hear all the time that you have to deserve love, you have to study well, so your parents are going to be satisfied, right? Or you have to be, you have to please your husband, do whatever he wants in order to have a happy family. It's all your responsibility. So it changes the way you see you, I suppose.
Because the message is, You're not good enough as you to be loved. That's the message you're getting. If you have to earn it, and you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you have to change, and you have to, what they're telling you is just you, as you are, isn't good enough. It's not enough. So that's why people grow up feeling that they're not enough.
So that's a key thing, I think, to realize, like after all these traumatic experiences, to understand that you are indeed good enough. And you don't need
100%.
anything or anyone. And you have love here in abundance. You have it anytime you want. You deserve it.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is
everyone is just perfect the way they are.
So guys, I just want to ask a question, guys. If you can relate to this, if you had any traumatic experiences like that, maybe you've heard some things like that from your parents, maybe you grew up in poverty, or maybe one of your parents were, I don't know, drug addicted or alcoholic. Like, what were you going through? What kind of messages did you receive that have a kind of maybe affected your life? So feel free to share. So you get all the support you need here. So we know now what the PTSD, and the PTSD, it's a single event trauma, right? So if something happened like one time, like for example, a car accident, or I don't know, might be excuse me. So can it what a divorce, for example, is it a PTSD or CPTSD?
What is what? Sorry.
How about a divorce? Is it a...
Well, a divorce essentially is people that have a really good childhood, and then they get married and they become in an abusive environment, and they're in that environment for a very long time. They can develop complex PTSD. It's not only from childhood, it's from an ongoing experience that you can't escape from, that you know is going to happen again. The majority of the time, you know the perpetrator, and then going through a long, drawn-out, painful divorce, it is part of the complex trauma, isn't it? Because it's still ongoing.
It is still ongoing. Okay, so PTSD is a single event trauma, like a car accident, and complex PTSD, it's an ongoing trauma that can take years, right? Like we are abused at home. Like I see here, someone is writing domestic violence, narcissistic abuse, which is horrible, because it changes even the chemistry of our brain, the way the blood flows, the way we feel the emotions, the way we respond, and then our emotions like overrule our life and start just messing with
Absolutely. I mean, it affects our relationship with ourselves on such a profound level, and it's our relationship with ourselves that we share with the world, right?
And then we receive more of what we are.
Yeah. So it's kind of like these changes and the way we've tried to accommodate surviving in response to narcissistic abuse, in response to sexual abuse, violence, neglect, drug and alcohol, the way that has shaped us is our relationship to ourselves and what we believe about ourselves. And then we're sharing that with the world. And essentially, you know, these changes are ongoing. And it's so hard to recognize that actually, do you know what? This isn't you. One of the big things that I always try and help people to believe is none of this is you. This is not you. This is symptoms. You, in your core self, is profound. It's beautiful. You're organic. You're amazing. You have something to share. You're incredibly strong to have survived and to try and continue to live with these changes. Yeah? But these changes are an impact, right? It's not you. You can heal. You've just got to understand your symptoms. You've got to find a trauma-focused therapist that is really skilled. You've got to find somebody that isn't afraid to go into that abyss with you and come out with you. Okay? So it can be healed. It doesn't have to be like this. So, you know, I just really want to get that out there, because I lived like that for all of my life. Until I started saying no. I just said no. And then I had to, you know, make a lot of changes. And it was very difficult, and it went on for a long time. But essentially, you can do it, you know, because when you realize this is not you, it is symptoms. You're experiencing symptoms and the impact of trauma. That's not you. That's just what somebody's done, you know. So I
Thank
just
you so
want
much.
people
This is
to
a
know.
very powerful message.
Yeah, it's just really important that people can start to understand that it can be over. It might take time, but it can still be over.
It will take an effort. So it is like one decision that you make to change your life once and
Yeah,
for all.
yeah. I mean, it's very hard. It took me a long time to be able to get to that point of realizing that I could say, I want something different now. You know, because when you're in complex trauma, have had complex trauma, you feel so powerless.
Yeah.
Because you were powerless. And that sense of powerlessness has continued throughout your life. However, you can take a moment and allow that into your consciousness, that actually you could take a step to make a difference for yourself. You can say, I'm not having this anymore. You can make that decision. If you're strong enough to still be alive, you're strong enough to make that choice. You know,
But
it's just realizing you can do it.
I still can feel that lots of people treat their mental health as something non-existent. You know, it's like when you have a toothache, you can run to see a dentist, right? You need help ASAP, right? But when you experience these moments of sadness, you feel overwhelmed, you feel anxious, you feel you don't believe in yourself, right? You don't like yourself, you might hate yourself, you feel grief, and people do not go to look for help because it's like, who is going to help me out there? I
Yeah,
have to deal
because
with
they
it by
have
myself.
that. Yeah, because they've never been connected to anybody. They're so isolated emotionally that they don't think, their underpinning belief is that I don't deserve help, no one would want to help me, and they have all the shame in them that prevents them from saying, I need help, because the people that should have helped them are the ones that have done that to them. So they've been taught that they can't ever ask for help.
But I think it's
Does it
very
make sense?
important for people to understand that if you are sad, if you are depressed, this also can be resolved.
Yeah,
Absolutely. You
yeah,
go, you look for help, you talk,
yeah,
and you get this
yeah,
out, and you might need
yeah,
to relive this moment one more time and go and look at it, and it's going to be scary as hell, but then it's going to be over. You don't need to live
yeah.
like this.
You don't. You don't need to live like that. You don't. You really don't. However, you know, it's not, recovering from complex trauma and PTSD is a journey. It's not a destination. It's ongoing, and you just do layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. However, when you are in the journey, when you get relief from some of the trauma, as you process this and you process that, your life begins to just change around you because you feel differently. You no longer feel these feelings. You know, the shame reduction is like, oh, I'm okay, am I? Oh, okay. It's like enlightening, like when you realize that none of that is you.
It's not
It's just
about me.
amazing. It's nothing to do with me. It was all about them. I just took it in. I absorbed it all, but it's not about me. It's about them. You know,
This
I
is
realized,
beautiful.
you know, what my mother said to me, it was nothing to do with me. It was all about her.
It was her
You
story.
know, nothing to do with me. It's just nonsense. You know, and unfortunately we grow up believing it is about us. It is our fault. It is that we're disgusting. It is that we're shameful. We don't deserve love. All of this nonsense that people have given to us, and we've taken it because we loved them.
Yeah.
You know?
Because I've heard so many times, like some of my friends telling me things like I think I'm not beautiful, I think I'm not good looking, and looking at themselves in the mirror and like, oh no, look at that big nose, no, that looks so ugly. And I asked my friend a question. I was like, who told you that? Like, who
Yeah,
told you that? And she was like, no one told me that. I was like, no, come on, get that out. I mean, like, try to remember who told you that you are fat. Who told
yeah,
you you have that big nose? She was like, oh no, well, my mother told me that a couple of times. I was like, so
yeah,
that was not
yeah,
about you.
yeah,
That was
yeah,
about her. So mentally give it back to her and forget about it.
yeah,
Nothing is wrong with
yeah.
you.
Yeah. It's just such a process going through that. I mean, it took me years and years and years and years and years to believe that, you know, I wasn't disgusting, because I'd just been fed that every
You
single
are
day.
beautiful woman, gorgeous,
Yeah, but
absolutely gorgeous.
when people drip feed you poison every day in your childhood, it infects you. It's like an infection, you know, it's like a disease that you've got. So it takes years. It took me years. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, you know, maybe I'm not that bad. Or, you know, and then I was like, oh, okay, I'm actually all right. And I look at what I do in my work, and I look at what I do with my children. I look at my environment, and I think, you know what? I'm not disgusting. And then I realized, you know, they are. The way they behave is disgusting. The things that come out of their mouth are disgusting. The things that they do to other people are disgusting, not me. So it's kind of like, it is a process, healing. And it is because you're restructuring your view and your relationship with yourself and the world. And that takes time. You know, it's not like a boom, one hit wonder, but it you know, it does happen.
But you're changing the way you think about yourself, first of all. And then it changes your life, and it changes the most powerful thing, I think. It changes the kind of your brain chemistry. Like, things start working differently in you biologically. So just the power of a thought, just a thought alone can change your body and health.
So, exactly. I mean, people just need to give themselves permission to say it's going to be different. You know, give yourself permission and allow a part of your consciousness to open to the fact that change can occur. You know, that's really it. That's where the beginning is. And with that, that's when you'll find the people that you need to find that will help you.
That's what I think. It is also very important to say, guys, when you need help, when you feel you are ready for a change, you will get the help. It comes from from places you were not expecting to get help. Like, you're going to just suddenly get a phone number or psychotherapist, or your friend is going to introduce you to one, or you're going to see that powerful post on Instagram, and you just read it, and then you decide it's time to change. It's just one decision, and I suppose the universe is going to help you. You just decide.
I mean, our environment reflects us a lot of the time. So when you're ready, and the world will meet that to some extent. But you've got to take the power, and you've got to take the control, and you've got to take your choice to meet that change. So it is a journey, and the journey starts with you, because everybody has the power to do this for themselves. You know, doesn't mean it's easy, but you do have it.
It's not. It takes years and years. Might take all life, but you're going to live a better life. There is hope. Okay, now I have another thing. Okay, but let's imagine, like, if you have a family member, okay, let's say, for example, you have a sibling, a sister, for example, and you see that your sister is very unhappy in her very abusive marriage, but she is unable to simply even, like, you don't know what's going on there, because we all know that the victims protect their abusers and try to create the image of a very happy family, but they are a mess inside.
That is part of... Okay, so that there is part of the symptoms of complex trauma. You idolize the perpetrator.
So you say he's a,
that's
he
part
or
of
she is
the
a god.
Yeah, they're amazing.
They're loving. They do everything
just
for
bring
me.
awareness that when people can't see what's going on, that's part of the trauma, because they're trauma bonded to this person. You know,
so they can't see what's going on in the reality. So what
because
can we do to help?
Educate them, give them information.
Like to show them that something is going wrong, right? Because I can feel that you cannot drag a person to see a psychotherapist, because unless you are ready, it's going to give no result. Like you can't bring a narcissist to go to see a psychotherapist, because they will not even admit that they have a problem. So they will make it look like it's not even their fault. Everyone is wrong, but they're okay.
So basically what you can do is educate them. Start talking to them, or just mentioning different types of behavior, different types of something's come up on the screen. So different types of behavior of narcissists, how it's quite normal to love people even when they hurt you. I mean, not to normalize it, but just to start making them realize that, you know, love isn't meant to be painful.
It shouldn't
Love
hurt.
should not hurt you, right? Love doesn't mean that you have to please someone. It's quite the opposite. So just bringing awareness to certain behaviors, giving them information, maybe sharing some posts and little quotes that are really quite hard hitting, you know, just drip feed it in so they can then start to accept that in their awareness. Because if you just barrage them, they'll defend the perpetrator and run. But if you just gently drip feed and, you know, ask them how they're feeling and why they're so tense and why do you feel that you need to get home at exactly that time, and maybe, you know, just doing little things so they become aware that them rushing home to get everything together before that person there is actually a sign of stress.
Yeah, and you don't need to run home like that because you're an adult. So you don't really owe anyone anything.
Exactly. But it's about just trying to gently bring them into awareness rather than just like barraging them, you know, just bring them into awareness about it all.
Yeah, so I think it's very important because I know that there are some people there who think that they can change the world, and that's not a good thing. We cannot force a person to change. It's actually a form of abuse because we cannot change, we should not change anyone.
And you're adding to the pressure. You're adding to their pressure because then they've got to accommodate you and your opinion on their life. I mean, obviously, if their life is at risk and they need to be taken out of there, then you do need to contact services. However, if you can get them out with a drip feed, if you can get them out with like a, you know, just constantly reminding them that you love them and you're there for them and what can you do and do you feel like this? And sometimes, you know, you just got to educate them about what's going on rather than try and bully them out of there.
Absolutely. I think it's very important for every person who is abused to know that you have someone you can trust, because that's a kind of feeling that all abused people have, that I can trust no one loves me, no one will ever support me, no one will believe me if I'm going to talk about things that happen at home. So I think the best thing we can do is
isolate. Abusers isolate their victims. You know, they isolate them emotionally, mentally, physically. So, you know, if you can remain that one connection to that person, you're going to give them resilience. You're going to give them strength. So, you know, be the connection rather than another bully.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful message. Okay, how about this? Like, how to heal? How can you heal?
How to heal? Okay. So, I mean, what I can talk about is how I healed and how I help other people heal.
Yeah.
So I use a framework which is called the tri-phased approach. So that is meaning 3 phases of treatment. First phase is safety stabilization, emotion regulation, and in that phase you reduce the impact of all of the symptom clusters. So you're processing flashbacks, you're processing the flashbacks out of the body, you're creating emotion regulation. So this whole phase is about restructuring the brain to work in a healthy way where it feels safe. So you're creating safety on an internal level. So you feel safe in your mind, you feel safe in your body, you feel safe in your emotions, you can respond rather than react, you reduce all suicide ideation, you get rid of all of that. So the person is able to function in the world and actually start enjoying themselves. They can respond to situations, they don't have affect dysregulation anymore, they can, all their relationships begin to improve. And only when somebody has a good, strong foundation there. One of the key things in phase 1 is connection. So this is one of the first things I support people with, is connection. So someone that's in complex trauma is completely disconnected from themselves, they're disconnected from their environment, they're disconnected from everything about them. So they're like in an abyss. So the first thing is to get them to connect. And that is to start helping them connect to themselves again. They'll connect to me as their therapist and as somebody that's supporting them in their process. Because connection essentially is what helps us resonate our frequency on a healthy level. So bringing our autonomic nervous system in line in a good frequency, so we're not in fight flight mode at all. So I mean, there's a lot more going on in there. So I may use 50 different types of models to create stabilization. And only when that person is feeling completely stable will we move to phase 2. So phase 2 is trauma processing.
Mm-hmm.
So processing trauma is done with specific trauma processing models and protocols.
Mm-hmm.
So to actually work very well with trauma, you need to be trained in at least 5 different psychological trauma processors. So different types of trauma processors are good for different types of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So if you use the wrong processor at the wrong time on a trauma, you can create even more dysregulation and danger to that person.
So
for example,
precise. You're like walking on a minefield.
Yeah.
So it's like anything can explode at any moment.
So you've got to be really skilled and like, okay, so they've got this, they've got sexual abuse, they've got severe neglect, then maybe they've been sold into trafficking, and then after that maybe they then drug and alcohol abuse, and then after that you know, they've had, you know, more domestic abuse, and then maybe after that they've gone into an institution, they've had institutional abuse. So you've got a lot of different types of complex trauma going on there, and they've probably had multiple single incident traumas on top of that as well. So when you're looking at treating that in a trauma processing stage, you're going to need more than one trauma processor. You need a lot of different processors to target different traumas at different times, and you need to do it in a strategic fashion, because if you don't and you get the wrong processor on the wrong trauma in the wrong order, you could create dysregulation. And essentially the goal of a trauma therapist is to make sure that person feels in power all the time, and that they can handle what you're going to do together. You never ever put them in a position where you can derail them. You have to contain them through the entire process and use your processing systems in the correct order. So essentially when you've processed the trauma, you've got your 3rd phase. So someone with severe complex trauma, PTSD, they've never had a life without it, right? So then all of a sudden these changes have occurred. They don't have the trauma anymore. But then they're left with what? Yeah? They now need to learn how to behave differently in these situations. They don't know necessarily how to respond to, they don't know how to make friendships that are out of the trauma world. So what do? You have to integrate new ways of being. You have to integrate new qualities, post-traumatic growth, a new future that they maybe have secretly dreamed about. And you've got to help them do the steps to be able to relate to themselves as a person that can achieve that. Yeah?
So it's kind of like you are building a new picture of the future you are going to have. So it's like you are learning to live all over again, like you're a child again. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was one person I worked with. This is an example, for example, of what can occur in the 3rd phase. She didn't know how to make friends or relate to people because she'd only ever had trauma friends and, you know, other people that had been in her sort of trauma. And so we would go and sit in a park and watch how the other mothers would talk to each other whilst they were all looking after their children together. So we would observe them, and then we'd discuss that. And then we'd get her to imagine doing that, and we'd have to have a pretend conversation. We'd see how that felt for her. Did she feel nervous? Did she feel afraid? What would she say? You know, so you literally almost have to create and reconstruct behavior, thoughts, responses. And so there's all sorts of things that go on in the 3rd phase.
It's beautiful what you're doing. So you're literally like a mom who is teaching your child how to, you know, how to be out there making friends. And I mean, that's what parents do, because I'm a mom too. My daughter is going to be 2 years old tomorrow. And so we're teaching our kids, right, how to approach people, how to talk to them, how to smile, who you should approach and who you shouldn't approach. So it's pretty much you're learning all over again, just like you are a kid again.
Yeah, and then it's also with relationships. Sometimes people you know, they have, because when they've been so abused, they think that they just have sex with people because that's just what you're meant to do, right? So it's then when they want to start dating again, teaching them about, you know, you're all right to say no, but because if they've ever said no before, there's been severe consequences. So they have to learn that actually they're allowed to have these boundaries. They're allowed to, you know, so you set up different structures for them in relation to what they need to move forward and have a life. So
I see it as like you need to kind of, in some way, it's like you have to not to demolish like the whole system you had in your brain before, but you kind of need to abandon the way you lived before, like the old patterns, the way you met people, the way you worked, the way you lived, the way you breathed, everything in your life. And then you are learning all over again, but in the right way, in a good way for you, in a safe way, with boundaries, with respect to yourself. All this is, it's like, it's not impossible, guys. I'm telling you, it's not impossible, because I was doing this and it works, and it's a lot of work, but it's totally worth it. It's totally worth it. What about, you told me about the trauma-focused therapy that you are doing, and you are planning something in January. Can you tell me more about it?
Oh yeah, so in January, basically, so in the first phase of treatment, this could easily be delivered in a group setting. So rather than it being therapy, being like talking to people about the exact symptom clusters of trauma, how it impacts their mind, their body, how it impacts their relationship with themselves, giving people tools, techniques, and emotion regulation, all these systems in, you know, so it's more like a course for people to go on. It doesn't include trauma processing, because that needs, well, there's only a couple of methods you can use in a group setting for that, but actually it's the whole stabilization. So I'm going to be in January offering stabilization courses. So it's a non-disclosure course. So people aren't there to talk about their trauma. People are there to learn about how it's impacted them, their behavior, the way they think, the way they feel, and then to learn tools and techniques to start stabilizing themselves, and to start gaining control of their internal systems, and then how to start changing them, and then to move on to emotional regulation programs. So I'm starting to offer in January these group courses, not group therapy, it's group courses. So for people that can't afford one-to-one therapy, I want to create these courses to make it affordable for them, so they can get a lot of the information, a lot of the resources and the learning and stabilization without, you know, for people that just can't afford one-to-one therapy.
Because I think we all understand now that you can educate yourself to be the person you want to be. So if there is something you don't know, it can be anything. If you don't know how to make good money, if you don't know how to make friends, whatever it is, you can learn. And that's what you are going to offer, right? So you are going to offer them education to learn how to be a happier person, how to live with your trauma and overcome this. And stabilize.
Start reducing, you know, let's just start reducing the impact of this, because it's not necessary. It's no longer necessary that people have to walk around with this. And, you know, I really want people to understand that, you know, they went through years and years and years of abuse. It can be different. I know that. I went through an entire lifetime of it. It can be very, very different. So I just want people to be able to access this, and I feel that it's not an exclusive thing, it's an inclusive thing. You know, it's like join the party, you know.
Join the party.
Join the party, so
this is beautiful. Thank you, Rachel, so much.
Thank you.
Because you are a great teacher, because I feel like you made things so clear, like everything now is in the right place. I understood everything, and that's fantastic. Thank you so much for what you're doing, because I kind of understood that it's such a complex matter. Seriously, like you have to be so skilled. It's more, it's harder than, you know, flying a plane probably, because you really need to be so careful, because you're dealing with the psychic, with the mental health, and it's so complex. You can hurt people even more if you're not a very professional person. And I definitely, guys, if you need help, I would gladly advise to go to you, because you are, my goodness, your methods. No, I didn't think it's possible. I need you here.
Oh, thank you, Lily. Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you so
Yeah,
much.
oh, it's been great.
Thank you very much, guys. If you have any questions, I will share this video on my IGTV and you can leave your questions below. We will be glad to answer. Thank you so
Great.
much. And it was
Yeah,
great to
thanks,
talk to
Lily.
you. Thank you. You have a
Wonderful. You take
great
care.
day. You too.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.